Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half. Shall we? So a couple days ago, I shared with you Rear Admiral Byrd'S secret diary, and tonight I am going to share with you Byrd'S Antarctic Expedition number 3, 1939 to 1941. By the late 1930s, officials of the U.S. government were becoming aware of the fact that interest in the Antarctic regions was gaining popular momentum among its citizenry due to the successful expeditions of Byrd. President Franklin D. Roosevelt took an active role in creating the United States Antarctic Service as he pushed for two separate Antarctic expeditions, one by Richard B. Black and Finn Ron, and the other by Admiral Richard E. Byrd, to be coordinated to form the United States Antarctic Service Expedition. In November of 1937, Dr. Ernest Gruening, director of the Division of Territories and Island Possessions of the Department of the Interior, asked Richard Black, the field representative of the division, to look into the vague requirements of the United States government for an official American expedition to the Antarctic. The United States Exploring Expedition, 1838 to 1842, led by Lieutenant Charles Wilkes, had been the last great adventure to the Antarctic with any direct involvement of the United States government. A statement was released by Black on May 1938, dealing with the government's interest in Antarctica, along with plans for a small expedition to the Antarctic. The expedition plans, jointly proposed by Black and Ron, both members of the Byrd's Second Antarctic Expedition, grabbed the attention of Dr. Gruening, who in turn informed the Department of the State and President Roosevelt. As all of this is going on, Byrd was in Boston with his associates making plans for a third expedition to the Antarctic. Like the first two expeditions, this one was to be privately funded. Late in 1938, Byrd became aware of the government's position and possible action when an official of the State Department approached him for a consultation on the subject. This meeting and subsequent planning was brought to the attention of President Roosevelt. On January 7, 1939, a memorandum was sent by the President to the acting Secretary of State, Sumner Welles, approving the plans developed by the Departments of State, War, and Navy. The President suggested the Department of Interior should be involved in the planning along with continued consultation with Admiral Byrd and Lincoln Ellsworth regarding the estimated cost of such an expedition. Additionally, the President wanted the group to consider the feasibility of maintaining a party each season at Little America and at the region south of the Cape of Good Hope. Two important developments resulted from the President's January 7th memorandum. First, Admiral Byrd decided to cancel plans for his private expedition and join ranks with the government. With his extensive knowledge of the area from this point forward, he was accepted as a leader and was to be actively involved with the planning and organization of the expedition. Secondly, an interdepartmental committee was formed. which eventually became the Executive Committee of the United States Antarctic Service. On January 13, 1939, the Secretary of State asked the Secretaries of War, Navy, Treasury, and Interior to appoint representatives to serve on the Antarctic Committee. On June 30th, Congress passed an act authorizing Antarctic investigations, and on July 7th, the President himself wrote letters to the secretaries urging them to designate the representatives. As a result, the original Planning Committee became what the President designated as the Executive Committee of the United States Antarctic Service. The 4 departments were represented throughout the life of the organization. Captain, later Rear Admiral C.C. Hartigan, and Mr. Hugh S. Cunning, Jr., represented the Navy and State Departments, respectively. Rear Admiral R.R. Wachish was later succeeded by Commander E.G. Rose as representative of the Coast Guard, Treasury. The Department of the Interior was represented in turn by Ernest Gruning, Mrs. Ruth Hampton, R.A. Kleindienst, Paul W. Gordon, Rupert Emerson, and Guy J. Swoop. Lieutenant Commander, later Commander, Robert A. English, USN, United States Navy, commander of the Bear of Oakland on the Second Byrd Expedition, was appointed Executive Secretary. He was succeeded in 1942 by J. E. McDonald, who had been an administrative assistant to Byrd. As commanding officer of the United States Antarctic Service Expedition 1939-41, Admiral Byrd was an ex officio member of the committee, having received his formal appointment from President Roosevelt on July 7th. Although the U.S. government-sponsored expedition, additional support came from donations and gifts by private citizens, corporations, and institutions. Although the Department of Interior was granted funding, it was woefully inadequate for an expedition of this size. Coordinated efforts by the other departments filled the gap for funding of the equipment, service, and supplies. Admiral Byrd donated many of his supplies which he had gathered for his own expedition, the largest item being the barkentine Bear of Oakland, which was leased by the Department of Navy for $1 a year. Some of the private donors misunderstood the magnitude of the government's involvement and subsequently became disturbed by the lack of advertising concerning their contributions. Well in the excess of 100 firms and individuals contributed money, supplies, and equipment to the expedition, including tractors, food, clothing, instruments, tobacco, and books. Charles R. Walgreen of Chicago and William Horlick of Racine, Wisconsin contributed equipment and supplies for the USS Bear, and the Collier family of Collier, Wisconsin. George F. Getz and Justin W. Dart of Chicago supplied the Barclay Grow seaplane carried aboard the USS Bear. 2 ships were used by the expedition. One was Admiral Byrd's old ship, the Bear of Oakland, which had been used on the second Byrd expedition. The ship was reconditioned by the Navy and commissioned as USS Bear for the expedition. The second ship, the USMS North Star, was a 1,400-ton ship, wooden ice ship built for the Bureau of Indian Affairs of the United States Department of Interior in 1932. She was used each summer to haul supplies to Alaska. Since summer in Antarctica was winter in Alaska, the Department of Interior was able to lend the ship to the Antarctic Service without interrupting the Alaskan service. The expedition was supplied with 4 aircraft. The USS Bear carried a twin-engine Barclay Grow seaplane on the 1939-40 cruise in Antarctic. Both East and West Base were supplied with twin-engine Curtiss-Wright Condor biplanes, which was used extensively by the United States Marine Corps for 5 years. The 4th plane was a new single-engine Beechcraft, which was to be used in conjunction with the snow cruiser. The snow cruiser, designed by Dr. Thomas C. Polier of the second Byrd expedition was built at the Pullman Company at a cost of $150,000, entirely funded by 70 cooperating manufacturers and by the Friends of the Research Foundation of the Armor Institute of Chicago, where Dr. Polyer was scientific director. This motorized monster was 55 feet long and 20 feet wide, with sled runners attached to its bottom. With the wheels extended, it was 16 feet high. Inside the machine were sleeping quarters with 4 bunks, a scientific laboratory, a photographic laboratory, a radio room, a chart room, and a galley. Twin 150 horsepower diesel engines were connected to the generators, which in turn supplied power for the 75 horsepower electric motor that drove each wheel. The tires were made of rubber and were 10 feet in diameter. When a downgrade was reached, the wheels could be retracted, allowing the snow cruiser to toboggan down the incline. Incredibly, the machine was designed to cross crevices up to 15 feet in width by rising the front wheels while the rear wheels powered the cruiser halfway across the gap, followed by a retraction of the rear wheels and a lowering of the front, which then pulled the machine the rest of the way. A single-engine Beechcraft monoplane was mounted on skis and designed to be carried on the top of the snowcrawler for aerial reconnaissance and exploration within a radius of 300 miles. Enough food for 1 year could be stored inside, along with 2,500 gallons of diesel fuel, enough for 5,000 miles of travel, and 1,000 gallons of aviation fuel. The snow cruiser was designed for a maximum speed of 30 miles an hour on a flat, hard surface. She could climb grades of 37 degrees, turn in its own length, and move sideways at 25-degree angle. A total of 125 men departed from the United States in the 2 ships of the United States Antarctic Service Expedition, or Byrd 3. Captain Isaac Lystad, commander of the USMS North Star, while Lieutenant Commander Richard H. Cruzen, United States Navy, commanded the USS Bear with Benedict Johansen as ice pilot. Most of the men who made up the expedition were solicited from the Army ranks, or military ranks, civilian agencies of government, and from scientific institutions. A few volunteers were employed by the Department of Interior for $10 per month. Food and clothing included. A total of 59 men, divided initially into 3 groups, wintered over in Antarctica. Dr. F. Alton Wade, senior scientist and geologist, was in charge of the snow cruiser, and 3 other men assigned to it. When it broke down as expected, it was parked at West Base, and the 4 men joined ranks with the West Base party of 29 men, led by Dr. Paul A. Stipple. The East Base party of 26 men was led by Richard B. Black. Many of the men had extensive prior experience in Antarctic with Byrd. Among them was Benedict Johansen and Paul Stipple of both the first and second Byrd expedition, while Chief Radio Operator Clay W. Bailey, Master Mechanic Vernon D. Boyd, Assistant Mechanic Louis P. Colombo, and Executive Assistant Lieutenant Commander Isaac Schulasbach, U.S. Navy retired, had all been on the second Byrd expedition. Black, the leader of the East Base, dog driver Joseph D. Healy, and transportation engineer Finn Ron were also veterans of the second Byrd expedition, as was Frederick G. Dustin, an aide to Admiral Byrd on board the USS Bear. It is of significant importance to mention that many of the men involved with this expedition went on to participate in future explorations in Antarctica. Finn Ron led his own expedition in 47 to 48, while Schulasbach, as captain of the expedition ship Henry Darlington III of East Base and Cook Sigmund Guttenko of West Base were also members of the Ron expedition. In 1946 through 47, then Rear Admiral Richard A. Cruzen was in command of Task Force 68 of the United States Navy Antarctic Development Project, more commonly known as Operation High Jump. Lieutenant George J. DeFeck was navigator on the USS Bear in 39 to 40, but went on to command the Eastern Task Group of Operation High Jump. From 56 to 59, Admiral DeFeck was commander of Operation Deep Freeze Task Force 43, U.S. Navy Support Force Antarctica, leading the United States participation in the International Geophysical Year. Van Ron and Carl Uckland at the East Base were eventually leaders of the U.S. bases during the first winter of the IGY 1957. Captain Richard B. Black was called back to active duty for Operation Deep Freeze 1 in 55 to 56. West Base veterans James C. McCoy, Charles C. Shirley, Vernon D. Boyd, Murray A. Weiner, Jack E. Perkins, and Paul A. Stipple were all active in Operation High Jump. The objectives of the United States Antarctic Service Expedition in 39 to 41 were outlined in an order from President Roosevelt dated November 25, 1939. This order was received by Admiral Byrd at Balboa Canal Zone as he boarded the USMS North Star on November 30th. The President wanted two bases to be established, East Base in the vicinity of Charcot Island or Alexander One Land, or on Margaret Bay if no accessible site could be found on either of the specified islands. The West Base in the vicinity of King Edward Land, but if this proved impossible, the site of the Bay of Whales at or near Little America was to be investigated. Early in November 15, 1939, the USMS North Star sailed from Boston en route to Philadelphia, where two planes were taken aboard. On November 21st, she sailed down Delaware Bay en route to the Panama Canal. The USS Bear left Boston November 22nd, calling at Norfolk on November 25th to take board one of the twin-engine airplanes. On the 26th of November, she cleared the Virginia Capes en route to the Panama Canal. Admiral Byrd had stayed behind to clean up last-minute operations and flew from Washington to the Canal Zone, where he boarded the USMS North Star at Balboa on November 30th. The USMS North Star then departed for New Zealand, stopping at Pitcairn Island on December 13th and 14th, and at Easter Island on December 17th. She arrived at Wellington, New Zealand on December 27th. The USMS North Star departed New Zealand for the Ross Sea on January 3, 1940, subsequently sailing into the Bay of Whales to establish West Base on January 12, 1940. After refueling at Canal Zone, the USS Bear sailed for the Bay of Whales on December 6, entering the bay on January 14, 1940. Working in two 12-hour shifts, the USS Bear was unloaded in less than a week, and by January 24th, the USMS North Star was underway for Chile to pick up additional supplies, including a Navy twin-engine Curtiss Wright Condor plane and prefabricated buildings. Meanwhile, the Bear, under the command of Byrd, worked its way eastward from the Ross Sea along the edge of the pack ice. A suitable site for East Base was not discovered until a reconnaissance flight by Byrd, Richard Black, pilot Ashley C. Snow, and co-pilot radioman Earl B. Pierce on the afternoon of March 8th. An island on the north side of Nini Bay, just north of Alexander Island, became the home of East Base. The island was subsequently named Stonington Island. By this time, the USS Bear had been joined by the USMS North Star, and by the evening of March 20th, both ships had been unloaded. The following morning, the two ships sailed for the United States. Both ships stopped in Punta Arenas, Chile, but from this point the ships separated as the USS Bear sailed for Boston, while the USMS North Star headed for Seattle to resume her regular cruise schedule to Alaska. Establishment of the base camps went fast and furious. Meanwhile, great hopes had been held out for the snow cruiser, but her failure was soon realized. If the snow cruiser had worked at all, it was within reason to assume the possibility of reaching the South Pole, particularly in a route could have been found toward the southeast from the Queen Maud Mountains. From the very beginning, the snow cruiser was plagued by misfortune. As a 30-ton machine was being offloaded at the Bay of Whales, the ramp partially collapsed under its weight, and Dr. Poyer, who was at the controls, avoided disaster by instantly applying full power, causing the machine to make a crunching lunge onto the bay ice. In spite of the huge wheels, adequate traction could not be provided in the snow. The tires kept 12 square feet of rubber on surface at all times, but her weight was simply too great. She sank into the snow, and her inadequately geared electric motors could not propel her forward at more than a snail's pace. A week later, she was still only halfway up the slope from the bay ice to the top of the ice shelf. Finally, after prolonged effort, the machine made it to the west base, where she was put to rest in a makeshift shelter of snow blocks and canvas. The crew now joined forces with Dr. Paul Stipple and the men of West Base. As outlined by President, the objectives of the expedition called for a broad scale of operations. The principal objective was the delineation of the continental coastline between the meridian 72 degrees west and 148 degrees west, and the consolidation of the geographical features of Hearst Island, James W. Ellsworth Land, and Mary Byrd Land. The second objective involved the delineation of the then unknown west coast of the Weddell Sea between Cape Elson and Lepolt Coast. In view of the broad scope of the objectives and the unpredictable circumstances that always arouse in Antarctica, it is remarkable that most of the objectives set for them were met. Of significance was the establishment and occupation for a year of two separate bases 1,600 miles apart by air and 2,200 miles by sea. Flights by seaplane from the USS Bear and by land-based airplanes from Little America 3 resulted in approximately 700 miles of coastline being added to the map of Antarctica. These discoveries included the Hobbs Coast, the Walgreen Coast, the Thurston Peninsula, determined to be an island in 1960, and the 8 coasts. Reconnaissance flights revealed previously unknown parts of the Ross Ice Shelf. Gaps in the unexplored regions between the Beardmore and Liv glaciers in the Queen Maud Mountains were also filled in. The sledge journey down the George Sound resulted in the discovery of its western outlet. In addition to settling the issue once and for all, the Alexander Island was indeed an island. Further aerial reconnaissance from East Base extended the coastline of Antarctica westward to about 85 meridian west, resulting in the discovery of Bryan Coast and Carroll Inlet at its eastern border. The east coast of the Antarctic Peninsula was photographed from the Trail Inlet and Three Slice Nunatak, approximately 68 degrees south, to beyond Nantucket Inlet, 74 degrees 35 south. A route was discovered across the Antarctic Peninsula from Stonington Island to the head of Trail Inlet. A sledge party from East Base was used this route to complete the ground survey of the east coast of the Antarctic Peninsula. from Trail Inlet south of Hilton Inlet. The sledging party explored the Dyer Plateau, in the process establishing 11 control points and triangulating the position of 58 mountains. A sledging journey from West Base to the Fosdick Mountains was made to study the biology of the region, and as a result, significant biological and geological specimens and photographs were brought back. Detailed surveys were made at both East and West Base. The first high-altitude meteorological station in Antarctica was operated during November and December of 1940. On the summit of the Antarctic Peninsula, east of Stonington Island, observations were concluded in every conceivable area: seismic, cosmic ray, auroral, biological, tidal, magnetic, and psychological, to name a few. All in all, it was an extremely successful expedition. With international tensions on a rise, it was considered wise to evacuate the two bases rather than relieve the present personnel with new men who would continue to occupy the bases. To assist in the evacuation, the USS Bear left Philadelphia on October 13, 1940, and the USMS North Star departed Seattle on December 11th. The U.S. Bear was the first to arrive at the Bay of Whales on January 11, 1941, with the USMS North Star close behind, arriving on January 24th. It was hoped that one day this base would be reoccupied, so much of the equipment and supplies was left behind as the two ships sailed from West Base on February 1st. From the vicinity of Scott Island, the two ships sailed eastward for Margaret Bay. By February 24th, both ships were off of Adelaide Island, northwest of East Bay, but a thick ice pack prevented them from entering Margaret Bay. To save fuel, the ships returned north, where they anchored in Anderson Harbor in the Melquire Islands, in the center of the Dogman Bay. Further attempts were made to penetrate the ice, but by the middle of March, they had not succeeded. The season was getting late, so it was decided to evacuate the base by air. Fortunately, the Condor had been repaired and test flown after the accident on January 19th, in which a ski had been cut off. On March 15th, the USMS North Star was ordered north to the Punta Arenas, Chile, where the men of West Base would disembark for food and fuel for a second year, would be put aboard the East Base in event the men could not be evacuated. Meanwhile, March 16th, the USS Bear put a party ashore in the Michelson Island, one of the Biscoe Islands just north of the Antarctic Circle, in order to build a landing strip suitable for evacuation purpose. The first flight left East Bay at 5:30 a.m. on March 22nd with 12 men aboard, along with records, specimens, and emergency equipment. The second flight brought the remaining 12 men. The plane was abandoned on Watson Island, and the USS Bear sailed immediately, arriving at Punta Arenas, Chile on March 29th. The USMS North Star arrived in Boston May 5th, and the USS Bear May 18th. Richard E. Byrd's story does not end here. Elsewhere, you could read about Operation High Jump and Deep Freeze, both of which Byrd was actively involved in. Admiral Byrd literally worked his adult life for personal, national, and international interests in Antarctica. In his final years, his role was unfortunately downplayed by the Navy, which only contributed to his failing health and eventual death. The following excerpt from 90 Degrees South by Dr. Paul A. Stipple says it best. As January 1956 ebbed, Byrd grew anxious to leave. We had achieved our main goals in Deep Freeze 1. He pointed out that there was little need to linger. His attitude was in sharp contrast with that which he exhibited on Operation High Jump. I recalled that when departure time came in 47, the striking sunset had turned the sky into a Kodachrome world. Even as the last call had been shouted, Byrd had kept his eyes fixed on the iridescent sky. "But I don't want to go yet, Paul," he said, shaking his head. But times had changed. The small discourtesies exhibited toward Byrd by Task Force 43 officers who felt Byrd represented the past had continued without abatement, and the strain of ignoring him had grown wearing to men whose temper could be Wagnerian when he was provoked. Time after time I could see the anger creep along the entire length of his body and then subside as his words came out steady, even casual. So on February 3rd, Byrd and I pulled out of the McMurdo Sound and headed home. For Byrd, it was his last departure from Antarctica. His wisdom had been responsible for bringing about the new era of the Antarctic activity. Others would carry on his work of exploration, making even greater use of scientific and mechanical tools of the modern world. None could live long enough to hope to make a greater contribution than he had. Moose Remington came to me at about 3 p.m. on March 12, 1957. His face clouded and his eyes avoided mine. "What is it?" I asked him. "I just heard the news over the Armed Force radio," he said softly, "that Admiral Byrd died today in Boston." When he left, I wrote a message for Mrs. Byrd, Marie, Dick's loving helpmate. "My grief is as one of the family. I am here at the pole largely because Dick wished it so. I will do my best to continue my job as he would want it to be done. Please accept my deepest sympathy." For the loss of a loving husband, father, loyal comrade, and one of the greatest American citizens, affectionately, Paul. A modest man, Byrd did not talk of his 22 citations and special commendations, 9 of which were for bravery and 2 for extraordinary heroism in saving lives of others. Nor did he boast of the medals he had amassed, which included a Congressional Medal of Honor, a Congressional Life-Saving Medal, a Distinguished Service Medal, the Flying Cross, and the Navy Cross. Instead, his talk was of matters of his adventures that went awry or did not turn out as expected. There was the accident to his plane that had enabled Lindbergh to become the first man to fly the Atlantic nonstop to Europe in a land plane. Later, Byrd had made the trip with Bert Acosta, George Novell, and Brent Bellichan. Though they had almost failed to reach France, they had crashed in the sea off the coast and had to swim for their lives. "How did those early years go for you, Paul?" he asked. "Not so adventurous or romantic as yours," I said. So on top of being a admiral, the guy was really just a down-to-earth adventurer with a love for the Antarctic. And it's sad in the end that he, the country he loved and really gave his life for, kind of shot on him at the end of it, Just a really interesting fellow. I'm actually just downloaded his autobiography, or biography, I guess it would be, to my Kindle so I can read it. And I'm looking forward to it because just doing these little things at night, the second half, has really intrigued me to look into more things and, things that I just kind of overlooked, I guess. But yeah, I'm definitely impressed with Admiral Byrd and all of his accomplishments and being the guy he was. He didn't want to leave. It was beautiful. In the end, he's staying there staring at this sunset saying, "I'm not ready to go." Truly amazing. What an American hero. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed tonight's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. May the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.